In this video, we're talking about Canadian taxes and what each party has planned for Canadians if they're elected. As a channel focused on the Canadian stock market, the Canadian election is a bit of a big deal for Canadian businesses. For example, the Liberals increasing the corporate income tax for financial and insurance companies by 3% on any income over $1 billion is big news for anyone investing in companies like Manulife, TD, or Royal Bank. That not only affects investors, but affects pretty much all of Canada because every Canadian or most Canadians have a bank account and most Canadians deal with insurance. And with a higher tax rate, this could result in fees or premiums going up. We're not here to harp on the Liberal Party, although I'm not voting Liberal, but I'm going to be talking about what my opinion is on each of the different tax propositions that each party has. So might as well start off with the Liberals because they're in power right now. The first tax that we're talking about today is a tax on the highest bracket income earners. Likely, maybe like 1% of you guys who are watching my videos are in that bracket. And by the highest tax bracket, at least the one on paper right now, is a $226,000 income earner or more. So that definitely is not me. I don't make anywhere close to that, so I have nothing to worry about here. But these high income earners, they tend to like to find different tax loopholes or have their accountants do funny things in order to lower their income. I don't know the tax loopholes, but if you do, let me know in the comments down below. But this would put a mandatory tax of 15% on these people. The second major thing that they propose is they're adding $1 billion of funding to the CRA. And it's not really specified how this $1 billion is going to be used. Obviously, it's to hire more employees and seek after those who are trying to cheat the tax system. But this might backfire on the Liberals because a lot of people like you and I, maybe you're too cheap to hire an accountant just like I am, and you do your taxes by yourself. Sometimes you make honest mistakes, and if they catch you like years later and realize that you owe a fairly significant sum of money, they could tack on interest to that payment from like 5 years ago and make you pay something absolutely absurd. So the Liberals are putting $1 billion to beef up the CRA and they end up going after the small fish, and obviously we'll never know, then that's really going to screw over the middle class and the lower class people more. The high income earners, they're going to find their ways through lawyers and accountants to be able to counter what the CRA is doing, and already they've got lawyers and accountants working for them. So it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that the CRA is going to be able to get much money out of these high income earners if they have already hired accountants and lawyers to figure out everything for them. The second party we're going to go after is the Conservatives. The first thing that they propose is that there's going to be no tax increase on workers, which is great to hear. I'm glad that my tax bills won't be going up, and you probably are glad so as well. They are planning to go after big corporations instead in order to get their money. And one of the ways they're going to do this is through funding the CRA just like the Liberals. They're going to add $750 million to CRA funding, so a little less than the Liberals, which is a good thing in my opinion, because I don't really want the CRA to get that much more funding. Unless they can actually prove that they can get taxes from corporations and target that money towards them, instead of spreading it out and getting the little fish like you and I. Why spend money on auditing someone who maybe makes like $20,000 to $40,000 only to find out that they owe an extra $150? What a waste of taxpayer money. But the Conservatives were pledging that the $750 million is going towards finding out those people who are able to afford accountants and lawyers. I mean, a politician's word is, I don't know, what's it worth to you? Not much to me, but if they can make it happen and prove it, then I might have a bit more faith in politicians. The third thing that they're going to do is go after those large foreign corporations. Companies like Amazon and Google who made record profits during the pandemic because everyone had to stay at home and were using their services. They're going to go after these companies because these companies pay next to no tax to the Canadian government. Amazon barely pays any tax at all because they're usually running a loss or barely cracking a profit. They're taking all the money that they earn and reinvesting it back into the business, and that's how they avoid paying corporate taxes. And this is what the Canadian government wants to go after, is by applying a 3% extra digital services tax on these companies, so that when they sell their goods, people have to pay an extra 3% to buy them. In the end, that will yield the government more money, However, it's not going to really hinder Amazon or Google because their services are pretty much necessities for companies to run. In fact, it's probably going to hurt small businesses even more. The large corporations, they can afford it. But the mom and pop shops or those companies that are still startups, they can barely afford the stuff that they're buying. So I don't know if the conservatives really thought through this and how they can actually target Google and Amazon. Because at the end of the day, these large corporations with monopolies are just going to pass it down to their customers. And their customers are like you and I, as well as the small businesses out there that run on these services. The third place party in Canada is usually the NDPs, so let's go after them next. The first thing that the NDPs are proposing is a wealth tax. And no, not on those who have like $1 million or $2 million. It's a 1% wealth tax on those people who have over $10 million in net worth. So yep, that means Justin Trudeau is going to get a wealth tax because he's worth over $10 million. The main problem that I see with this wealth tax is that it might actually drive the wealthy out of Canada. Because when you see that you're going to get a 1% tax on your entire wealth, at least that's what I believe it's going to be, 1% of $10 million is $100,000. At that point, maybe people just move to the States because the economy and prospects are just a lot greener over there. You can do a lot more, there's less taxes in general, so why not hop the border? So this will just drive away all the smartest people or the richest people in this country to look over the border and maybe move there. So if you were sitting there thinking that, that's great, those people who are super wealthy are going to get this 1% tax and just help out the general public. Think again. These wealthy people got there for a reason, they're smart, and they're going to find a way to avoid that tax or just earn more money. The second thing that the NDPs are doing is similar to what the Liberals are doing. They're increasing the highest tax bracket, which is those who earn over $226,000 from 33% to 35%. 35% is charged to them on amounts that are over $226,000. So it's not like their entire income is taxed by 35% from the federal government on top of whatever the provincials charge. It's only the amount that's over $226,000. And the last thing that the NDPs are proposing is changing the capital gains tax from 50% to 75% of your capital gains. And this is probably trying to target those who are in the C-suite level where a lot of their compensation comes from stock options. Because when they cash in stock options, it's subject to capital gains tax, not normal income tax, meaning that only 50% of that is added to their income and taxed at whatever tax bracket they're in. That might sound fine and dandy, however, you're also on the hook for this, and so am I, because we pay capital gains tax. If you invest into a stock and buy it in a cash account, and you make any sort of gain on that when you sell it, you're subject to capital gains tax. So let's say I made $100 on a stock like TD. 50% of that, or $50, is going to get added to my income and taxed at whatever tax bracket that $50 falls under. However, with this new rule, if NDPs are elected, they're going to tax $75 of my $100 that I gain off that TD investment. And with so many different people starting investing this past year and seeing the explosion in new Wealthsimple accounts, this is going to affect everyone who has money in a cash account. Next, moving on to the parties that are likely not going to be elected. The first party we'll talk about here that won't be elected is the Green Party, unless an act of God happens. But the Green Party, they're doing something similar to the NDP. They're proposing a 1% wealth tax, but on people who are worth over $20 million. So Justin Trudeau, you're protected here because your net worth, at least online, is around $10 million. On top of that, the Green Party is trying to close some loopholes on stock options as well as capital gains tax. What these loopholes are, I'm not really sure because this article that I read didn't lay it out. But I imagine the stock options, again, are targeting those C-suite levels who most of their compensation comes through stock options. Those people like Dr. Hamza from CloudMD who decide to sell a significant portion of his shares. Well, guess what? He only paid tax on 50% of that. And there are many other different directors out there who sold out of their stocks when there was a huge stock market boom earlier this past year. I mean, still the stock market is high right now, and it's very hard to find cheap deals. And the stocks that have dropped by about 50% already, if you compare them to their prices before the pandemic, they've probably still risen like 5 or 6 times. It's only because of the huge stock market bull run, some of these stocks rose like 900 or 1,000%, and now they're just coming back down to earth. It might be a little late if the Green Party gets elected and implements these rules, because a lot of people already took a decent amount of money out of the stock market through stock options. Now, the last party we're talking about is the People's Party of Canada, and they're doing something extremely controversial. They're actually cutting taxes on all income. They're cutting taxes for corporations, as well as they're cutting taxes for capital gains. But these cuts can't come yet until the deficit is eliminated. So it looks like the People's Party of Canada is really focused on paying back the deficit that Canada has. And unfortunately, if they become the winner of the Canadian election, they're going to be dealing with the massive amount of debt that the Liberals left them in. So it's unlikely during their time, if they were to become in power in the government, that they would be able to cut taxes because there's just such a huge debt. Now, wrapping this all up, as Canadians right now, we're dealing with a pretty huge deficit. However, our deficit to GDP is relatively on par with the past. But because GDP is going up, the deficit continues to go up, and eventually someone's going to have to pay for it, or we can just sit in this never-ending loop of debt. But if tough times come, again like the recession, we could be dealing with an even larger deficit, and the worst thing that could happen is we end up like Greece, where we have to default on our debt. Now, all these politicians are trying to sound noble by increasing taxes on the wealthy and trying to give to those who are poor, except for the People's Party of Canada, who's trying to decrease taxes for everyone. But the one thing that we never hear the government saying is that the MPs are cutting their wage. Now, let's take a look at what MPs make. MPs make about $150,000 and the Prime Minister makes about $400,000. Now, how can any Prime Minister say that he understands how the middle class feels? Because clearly a $400,000 salary is a pretty sweet gig in my opinion. Obviously it comes with the stresses, but I think that if they showed leadership by cutting their own salary, then wouldn't more people follow suit and actually pay taxes like those who are wealthy? Isn't there the saying, lead by example? This is one thing that I want to leave with you guys is how much politicians make and how little value do I actually receive from the politicians and their policies. In fact, they probably raised my taxes in the past. If you guys enjoy this kind of content, remember to leave a like down below and let me know if you want me to do a few more segments on the upcoming election. I'll be trying to film some videos over the weekend, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you want to see. I by no means have read everything about every single party and all their policies, but I've done a little bit of research here and there. So take everything that I say here with a grain of salt, and a lot of it is just opinion. With that said, check out my latest portfolio if you're interested in that journey. I'm trying to grow this portfolio from $2,000 to $50,000 in 3 years. You can check out my recent progress in every stock that I own in that portfolio.